Few minutes late, but I made it. Welcome to Cat Chat. Today, let's talk about Sugarcat Manor. Sugarcat Manor is a place where cats with diabetes come to enjoy themselves. It's a bit of a spa, but mostly a place where they eat what they want and get the medications that they need. We'll talk more about diabetes in cats in just a moment. But I'd like to welcome you to Cat Chat. Cat Chat with Penny. Penny is me. I am Penny. I'm not a cat, but I talk about cats. I am the founder of Mew Mew House. You can see on my hat. Mew Mew House, which is a retirement home and hospice for cats. I take in cats of all kinds, including special needs cats. And at this point, we have 5 diabetic cats in the house, so it feels like a good idea to talk about diabetes in cats today. And if you see bugs flying around behind me, it's because there are stink bugs everywhere in here, and I gotta figure out what to do about it. But before I delve into what is diabetes in cats, I like to know where you're watching from. Hello, I am right now in Western New York, Williamson, to be exact. In the 80s, it's finally summer-ish. Summer doesn't officially start for another couple of weeks, but yeah. Past few weeks have been pretty wild for me, which is why I haven't had a cat sheet in a while. But things are starting to settle out, and so it's time for me to do another one. And one of the things that's happened is that I've taken in 2 more diabetic cats. So this is why we're going to talk about diabetic cats. All right. And I apologize right now if this seems a little disheveled because my life is chaos right now and I just ran in the door and turned on the software and here we are. But what is diabetes? Diabetes is an interesting thing. And but what diabetes is helps explain why we call diabetic cats sugar cats. So diabetes is when oh, sorry. It's a blood sugar disorder. So your body, the only currency of energy in your body, well, the actual only currency of energy in your body is ATP. That's for another day. But ATP comes from glucose. And glucose is the sugar that's in your blood. Now there's lots of different kinds of sugars, and you can recognize a sugar because it ends in ose. So sucrose is like table sugar, if I recall correctly, fructose, saccharose, anything that ends with an ose is a sugar. Glucose is one of them. Whenever we eat something, if it's got sugar in it, it gets converted to glucose in our bodies. So if you're eating fructose or non-fructose corn syrup or whatever, sucrose, your body converts it to glucose so they can go into your bloodstream because the only sugar your body can use is glucose. And glucose is the only place where your body cells can get energy to do the crazy metabolic things that it needs to do. And in the end, what's really important about glucose in your blood is that it is what keeps your brain functioning. And this is important because if you have low blood sugar or you're not getting blood into your or blood sugar into your cells, then you have all kinds of problems. Okay. So diabetes is a disease where your body is able to get the glucose into the blood, but it can't take the glucose out of the blood and bring it into the cells to generate this ATP, which is the magical fuel of the cell. It's not doing it. And the way cells bring glucose into them from the bloodstream is triggered by this little molecule called insulin. Probably heard of insulin, and a lot of people who are diabetic take insulin. You've also probably heard of people who are pre-diabetic are also insulin resistant. Insulin is the molecule that tells your cells to take in sugar. If insulin isn't doing its job, or the insulin isn't there, then the sugar stays in the blood and the cells are starved for energy. This is a big problem for two reasons. One is that your body, like your brain cells, aren't getting enough energy to function, and then they misfire, and then you could die. I mean, this is extreme, but this is what diabetes can do. But also, your blood sugar is really high, and with really high blood sugar, it actually strains the filtering systems of your body, your kidneys, your liver. They are trying to get that sugar out of you, which is actually why cats that are diabetic tend to drink a lot of water because their body's trying to get all the sugar out of their blood and it's clearly not going into their cells. So blood or glucose or diabetes is a disease where your blood sugar is too high and the glucose isn't getting into your cells. There's two ways that this can happen. You can be born in such a way where your body just isn't making insulin. This is called type 1 diabetes in humans. And there's no insulin, so your cells don't get the signal. They can't actually bring glucose in. So you take insulin to help trigger the set of reactions that have to happen to get the glucose into the cell. There's also type 2 diabetes, which this is related to this insulin resistance um, challenge. And that's where your body has been so flooded with glucose, with sugar, that the insulin just isn't working anymore. The cells are like, "Oh man, this again?" So we call that insulin resistance because the cells just aren't responding to it anymore. Now, in this case, we often still give insulin to give it more insulin to sort of trigger things, but this is also the kind of diabetes that can be helped by weight loss because, and it's not necessarily weight loss that's the thing. It's just that what triggers this kind of diabetes often, not always, but often is due to dietary choices that bring way too much sugar, way too much of these oses into the body. And a big source of that is carbohydrates. Okay, carbohydrates are just a fancy way of saying things that are sugar like. And so your breads and your candy and yeah, all of this stuff are just loaded with carbohydrates, which is very quickly turned into sugar. Bad news for your cells, and they're trying to figure out what to do with all this stuff, right? Cats have the same problem. The reason why cats get diabetes, and just like in humans, diabetes in cats is most often type 2, and it's often related to their diet. The challenge is that, hard foods, the kibbles, the crunchy stuff, the crunchy nom noms, as I like to say around here, it's loaded with carbohydrates. It's kitty candy. It's delicious. They love it because it's super loaded with energy. The problem is that, that really, really works the system, gets their blood sugar to go up, and then they can develop insulin resistance. This is a problem. So if you can cut back on all the carbohydrates, both humans and cats, you can often reverse this pre-diabetes or insulin resistance. And cats actually can get all the way, I hesitate to say cured, but they can go from being very diabetic to not being diabetic at all if you can get them if you can adjust their diet and get them to lose some weight. So that's out there. So with cats, they often come, they're diabetic, their blood sugar is super high, and you give them insulin to help their body know to take the glucose in. Now, there's always a risk here, and I've had this happen more than once. Too much insulin, they take in all their blood sugar, and then suddenly they're hypoglycemic, which means they have low blood sugar. Big problems. Okay, when this happens to diabetic humans, it happens to me. I'm just a person who naturally gets hypoglycemic quite frequently. Your brain is suddenly starved for energy, and you start doing crazy things like walking into walls and having seizures. It's You pass out. This is not a good thing. So you have to balance this. And in cats, yes, you can use insulin to help treat them. There are many types of insulin designed specifically for cats and dogs, but also some cats use human insulin. I've had a couple of cats on human insulin, and one of the five here right now is on a human insulin. Okay. So let's see here. So the most common treatment, the one that people think about with diabetes, is to be getting insulin shots. Now, humans, because we understand what's going on, we can actually do blood tests and make sure our blood sugar is right and figure out how much insulin to give ourselves. Cats, not so much. So what we do is we give them a slow-acting insulin um, twice a day, 12 hours apart, and then make sure they always have food available so that they don't crash. But when you are feeding them, you try to give them the best diet possible. And I've had one cat actually fully recover from diabetes. And one of the cats here now, who's been here for a while, Gizmo, his insulin needs have dropped off enough that I'm hoping that sooner rather than later he will be able to go off of insulin altogether. He's actually lost a ton of weight. Um, the opposite has happened with Lewis and Boots. I think they're so used to trying to eat in order to build up enough energy that when they finally had insulin, they kept eating, and now they've ballooned up into some very large kitties. Still trying to feed them the best diet I possibly can. In fact, if you want to avoid diabetes in your house, you should first think about diet. Now, this is where, all the common knowledge about diets is so confusing because some people are like, no, kibble is better for the teeth. Wet food rots the teeth, but you have to deal with the opposite. Kibble is loaded with carbohydrates and can lead to diabetes, whereas the wet foods tend to be very low in carbohydrates. So it's actually really good for their blood sugar, for maintaining things where it needs to be. So what do? I feed a balance of wet and dry foods. They get 2 meals of wet food every day, and then the dry foods I provide for them are all, low glycemic index foods. So glycemic index is a measure of how much carbohydrate is in there. So if you get something with low carbohydrate, that means it's going to have higher protein, which and somebody's going to be like, it's not exactly right, and that's fine. Um, but the idea is you want to give them foods with low glycemic index, so it isn't quick sugar, so it takes them a while to digest it, so that they don't get that big sugar spike, which is so dangerous. And there are, unfortunately, most of the really great low glycemic index diets are prescription only, but there are some pretty decent. I usually offer food for older cats because they're not active, and so those foods already are created with a low glycemic index to keep the less active cats from turning into blobs. Now, one of the things that I have to do, and I'll talk about it one of these days. I've talked about it before, is glucose curves in humans. We understand what's going on, and we can do finger sticks 5 times a day and pay attention to how our blood sugar is changing. Cats, yeah, right. um First of all, how do you even do a blood sugar measurement in cats? You can actually do it. It can be done. And a glucose curve, I'm not going to explain how it can be done because I don't want anybody to try to do it. um But a glucose curve is what you do with the cat. You feed them normally, you give them their insulin normally, and then in increments of every 2 hours, you track their blood sugar and how it changes relative to when they eat, when they got their insulin, and all that stuff, so that you know how low it gets and how high it gets, because it's never going to be perfectly flat. Just like in humans, right? If we eat a whole bunch of candy, we're going to have our blood sugar is going to go through the roof. And if we don't eat for a while, it's going to bottom out. You want to keep it within some limits, and a glucose curve is going to help you know where that is. And then you can look at that and then make adjustments to their medications. That's the long and the short of it. So at the moment, I, I I think, I was half joking when I realized I was suddenly going to have five diabetic cats in the house, which means I go through 10 syringes every day because you can't reuse syringes. I'm going through insulin like crazy right now. So if you feel like it, if you have the monies, um, you could go to mewmewhouse.org and make a donation so that we can actually buy some more insulin because we go through it like crazy here. Thankfully, um, well, pet insulin isn't cheap either, and it it we go through it pretty quickly because whatever. Nobody wants to know that. All right, it's a low dilution, so you use a lot of it. Um, so you can help us with donations so we can buy some more insulin, which is something we really need to do right now. In fact, is to get some more insulin. So any donation, even $5 would be fantastic so that we can get them more insulin and all that good stuff. But the long and the short of it is, I think I've already said that, is that diabetes in cats, yes, it can be hereditary. It can be something that just comes on. It could be something they have from birth, just like in humans. But just like in humans, a lot of times it's their diet that results in them becoming diabetic. And then we have to treat that by adjusting their diet. And we can also help with giving insulin, especially, as soon as they're diagnosed, you want to start giving insulin so they don't have any organ damage. So you can get that insulin, that blood sugar down, and then work at it with diet and exercise, and maybe they can actually go off of insulin. Like I said, Gizmo, he started out, his blood sugar levels were around, I think they were off the scale over 500 when he was first diagnosed. Now, both in humans and cats, the target number is 100. And I can't remember what the units are, the milligrams per deciliter or something weird like that. The point is, well, if you use a human glucometer or a cat glucometer, they actually work exactly the same way. So if you're diabetic and you know what's good for you, it's the same for your cat. We try to keep our diabetic cats between 50 and 150 would be great. We're happy if we can keep them below 200 for some of them. That's pretty awesome. And insulin helps with that. And then we adjust their insulin to make sure their highs aren't going too high and their lows aren't bottoming out completely. Like I said, insulin costs some money, and you do have to do glucose curves. So if you are considering or have a cat that has diabetes, this is something that's going to have to be done. I've learned to do it myself because otherwise you have to take your cat and the cat has to stay at the vet all day. And unfortunately, glucose values can go up with stress, so it might not give the best reading possible unless you have one of these super social cats who doesn't care. I have some cats that be very stressed out, so I do them at home. It's also a little cheaper. Maybe it's not. Actually, test strips are really expensive. But if you like what you're hearing today about cats and Sugarcat Manor, because that's what we seem to be living in. Here we are, Mew Mew House and Sugarcat Manor with the five diabetic boys. If you like what you're hearing, please like and share. Give me some comments, some thoughts. I'm always interested in knowing where people are watching from. And I sure hope this is useful to you all, especially if you've just had a cat diagnosed and you're nervous about the whole thing. You're like, oh no, Oh, is this the end? It's not. Cats can live a long time with diabetes and they may actually recover. And if you want to know more, if you want to support Sugarcat Manor, um, please feel free to go to mewmewhouse.org and you can get t-shirts. You can do all sorts of things to help support the cause. And right now the cause is to buy some insulin. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a lovely day. I have to go feed some cats.